Is merit an objective concept? Is it a static thing?
I don't think merit is a static thing, and I think probably all we need to do is look historically at how the various ways that merit has been defined in different contexts and different types of institutions to see that it's not a static concept.
We just started to notice more students struggling academically, but we tried to, again, use our data, do a retrospective analysis, look at their admissions data, and what we consistently saw was a marginal academic history.
I do think that context piece is incredibly important, being able to read for what matters.
I think it's just being nimble. If you do think you see something, try to collect the data on it and determine whether it's just a hunch or whether it's real.
This is one of my big questions, certainly to our medical schools, is what are you actually explicitly defining as merit and what is just, hey, these are the criteria and this is what we value in applicants.
Welcome to the On Air podcast. This podcast is a program of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges Thrive Initiative, formerly known as the Diversity Matters Initiative. This podcast explores various issues related to diversity and well-being in the veterinary profession and provides AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing programming to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Dr. Lisa Greenhill, and I am the Chief Organizational Health Officer here at AAVMC. On today's episode, we are exploring the concept of merit. So, when you hear the word merit, what comes to mind? Maybe hard work, talent, maybe, earning your place, or in the current kind of world that we're living in, didn't earn your place. It can be also considered a fair system where effort leads to reward. Well, merit is one of those constructs that feels self-evident. We tell ourselves that success is the result of discipline and ability, that progress is proof of deservedness, right? And merit reassures us that the world, at least in some way, kind of makes sense, right? It's a kind of scaffolding concept. But merit is also really complicated because behind every achievement are, or at least there should be, questions that we don't really get a chance to ask very often. Like, well, who decides what counts as merit in the first place? And what talents are being recognized while other talents might be overlooked? And how much of what we call earned is actually shaped by opportunity, access, timing, or just right place, right time, sheer luck? Right. So today we're exploring merit as a social construct, especially as it pertains to health professions program admission. We'll talk about why merit-based systems can feel fair and motivating, and maybe why they, maybe can sometimes reinforce inequality and invisibility for people whose contributions don't fit neatly into traditional measures. So, because merit is never just about individuals, we have to acknowledge that it's about systems and about the values that those systems hold. So this is really a great topic. I've been wanting to do it for some time. I am very, very delighted to welcome two amazing guests for this conversation. Dr. Melinda Frye of the Colorado State University's College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences, and Amy Addams of the AAMC, Association of American Medical Colleges, downstairs around the corner, probably at our house. Hi, Amy. How are you?
I'm great, Lisa. How are you?
Great. Hi, Melinda. How are you?
Hi, very well. Thank you so much for inviting me into this conversation.
Great. I am so excited to have you both. So as is our custom on the show, I'm going to ask each of you to tell us a little bit more about yourselves. And Melinda, we're going to start with you.
All right. Well, as you said, I'm the Associate Dean for Veterinary Academic and Student Affairs here at Colorado State University. I've been in my position since 2014, and although I oversee the entirety of the DVM program, I'm so grateful to have Shannon Henshaw as our Director of Admissions, and I'd like to just thank her publicly for her sharing of ideas with me in preparation for this podcast and just her guidance and expertise in general. She's very wise, and I'm very grateful for her. I'd also like to just thank Dr. Naomi Nishi, our Associate Dean of Culture, Community, and Accessibility, who has, since she's come on, just taught me so much in this area and really challenged a lot of my personal beliefs and has helped me to grow and helped our program to grow. So
Oh,
grateful for all those folks.
wonderful. Shout out to that CSU team.
Hmm.
Awesome. And Amy, welcome.
Thank you. So, hi, everybody. I'm Amy Addams, the Director of Mission Alignment and Disability Inclusion at the AAMC. And I've been fortunate to work in and around medical school recruitment, admissions, and selection for over 19 years now. I'm incredibly grateful, just to kind of echo Melinda, incredibly grateful to have gotten to work with and more importantly, learn from and be challenged by just a really incredible community of admissions directors and deans at our medical schools, as well as just a lot of really fantastic colleagues at the AAMC who come from all sorts of different backgrounds and disciplines, and all of that has really shaped how I tend to think about merit.
Hey, well, let's get into it right away then. So, Amy, I'm going to ask you to start. So, is merit an objective concept, or is it shaped by other stuff, culture, values? I mean, I kind of gave away it a little bit in the lead up, but yeah, well, is it a static thing?
I don't think merit is a static thing, and I think probably all we need to do is look historically at how the various ways that merit has been defined in different contexts, in different time periods, in different countries and parts of this country, and different types of institutions to see that it's not a static concept. So I think it's highly shaped by cultural and institutional values. And also, I would add, and this is really, I've been reading Amartya Sen's work on merit and found a tremendous amount of alignment there. And he brings in this concept of kind of what is the societal good? What is best for the larger society, which I think directly informs what we consider meritorious in any particular context or discipline or field. I think that's particularly true in the health professions, whether we're talking about caring for animals or humans.
Mhm. Yeah. Melinda, so, how do you think about this through that lens, particularly of admissions?
Hmm. Yeah, and I very much agree with Amy's position on this. Certainly, its merit is defined by our institutional and program priorities, our mission, our values, and this really shapes how we approach admissions. And an example for us at Colorado State is that we are a land grant mission, and so we want to reflect our state demographic in our classes. A couple veterinary specific examples that I thought about are, our professional landscape has changed so much since COVID. We have many more diverse roles becoming a lot more common. And this just requires more focus on very broad problem solving, curiosity, leadership, communication. We also are seeing more emphasis on accessibility to care and serving underserved communities. And so we have, adjusted our approach to admissions based on these changes in our professional landscape.
Yeah. And so that's also going to be, I mean, certainly a good chunk of the schools are land grants.
Hmm.
That number is balancing all the time with the rise of new institutions, and certainly there's so many more med schools than vet schools. But yeah, I mean, each school will have its mission and its priorities. And, so we were before the show, we were just chatting about a school in Tennessee that I visited. And, their mission is to serve Appalachia, both in terms of admitting students, but also hopefully bringing students to the region to provide veterinary care, right? And so, so from an applicant perspective, it's really kind of interesting because I'm not sure applicants necessarily make the tie-in because they're often so focused, again, from a merit perspective of these are the requirements and I have to have the highest number, presuming high is good, for these things, right? And so sometimes merit from an applicant perspective might seem kind of like, okay, but I'm in these lines. That's where you told me to be without consideration for all of this other stuff. So Melinda, you've been in your role for 14 years. What has maybe was counted as, something that you all looked for meritoriously, years ago that maybe has fallen by the wayside now? It's not as important. Not only because it doesn't tell you as much academically or those types of things, but also not consistent with where the institution is now.
Mm-hmm. Back in the day, we definitely we've always had, or for as long as I can remember, we've had a holistic approach to admissions. But of course, even that definition has changed over time. We've had different reliance over the years on things like standardized testing, interviews, how much weight GPA carries, if there is a cutoff, and if so, what do we do with that? And so now for instance, here we have individuals who have a cumulative GPA of 3.2 or lower go into an early review process, and some of those individuals are returned to the pool for full evaluation, and others, the decision is made to, hey, maybe this isn't quite the right time for you, and here are some things you might do to strengthen your preparedness. So we continue to have few hard cutoffs consistent with our program historically, but I know that's not true of everyone. And as we've talked about, for some institutions, cutoffs are used and they're absolutely appropriate with the mission and vision. And so, but I would say all in all, a lot of us are moving to more of a competency-based approach, similar to CBVE and our competency-based veterinary education in the actual training. And so we've integrated those into our admissions process, and that's quite new. So we're looking at things like problem solving, perseverance, social maturity, professionalism, importantly, curiosity and engagement and communication skills. So again, really getting to that idea that it's not a strict GPA or standardized test, which we've not had for several years now, and really looking at some of these skills that, as I said earlier, can serve an individual across a number of different professional roles.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm fascinated, and we're definitely going to come back to that population that you do an early review of, because I think that gets into some questions that I have later about this kind of contextualizing, right? There's a group that you're like, yeah, they're not going to quite make the cut.
Mm-hmm.
And, but there's also a group that we think could still be competitive at this particular GPA, right? And that means that
Yes.
there's other stuff in there that, you have different kind of mental models around kind of what does that information tell you, right? And that student is on their way to earning, air quote, heavy on the air quotes, their way into CSU's vet school. Amy, I'm really kind of interested in what you think about kind of how things have changed, and you made a reference to the different all the different kind of big picture ways that we've changed. But I'm like, look, it was what we're in the US anyway, we're filming in the US, and everybody here on the show is from the US. So, 250 years ago, the only people that could go to school here were white male landowners' kids, right? And so male kids, cis male kids only, right? And so that was somehow your access point, right? That was enough merit. Like, here, I'm presenting in this body, and my dad is rich and owns land. Like, I can go to school, right? And so what we define as merit is actually a lot more loose. It feels a little bit more loosey goosey than maybe we liked it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is actually where I come back to some of Sen's work because part of his argument is actually, or I think part of the argument is that it's actually more objective to ground merit in societal needs and societal good.
Mm.
Because then you can come to perhaps a shared understanding of what those needs are and what that societal good is. And if I think in terms of even like medical school admissions or any of the health professions, it just kind of it makes an intuitive sense to me that we would ground our definitions of merit in the job that we are selecting learners to do and develop to do, which, we just did a session at a conference on merit and proposed this is a draft, it needs refinement, but a definition of merit where it equals comprehensive readiness. So that's academic, personal, and professional readiness is right. You have to be it takes a lot to be able to enter these educational environments. They're intense. But that comprehensive readiness aligned with community and workforce needs. So it's really taking all of these different things into account and thinking about the job that we're educating the students to be able to do. And, you all know about this better than I do. Melinda, you know this way better than I do, is there are certain things that are, say, easier to educate and develop in learners than others. And things like compassion and a service orientation and orientation to others instead of a self-orientation. Things like this are extraordinarily difficult to develop in somebody if they don't enter in with it. You can probably teach a lot of people biochemistry, but teaching some of those other professional competencies can be extraordinarily challenging. So that's one of the things I come back to is what do you need your learners to enter with? And then what are you as an institution committed and resourced to developing and educating them around?
Yeah.
Don't know if that answers your question, Lisa, but
It does. But I mean, I think that you also raise some really important points about, okay, so we know that the end point is graduating this day one ready professional, right? In our case, veterinarian. And we want them to have all of these skills. Also, we want them, despite the fact that many of them are like, we want to be veterinarians because we don't like people. And I'm like, okay.
yeah,
Like,
that's not going to go well.
let's put that back into the merit formula here. But like, right. But to your point, how are we looking at some of these other aspects of our being in the evaluation process, right? And so one of the things that Elizabeth Cavallaro and I just, we were working with a school that was experiencing some really crazy things earlier this year as a result of some federal policy. And one of our realizations was, oh, we actually have a competency issue here with emotional regulation, right? And that, y'all want to talk about resiliency. And I'm like, we are so not there yet. We need people to learn how to calm down, right? Or to not just calm down, but literally learn how to deal with these stressors without, the freakouts that folks like Melinda get swept up in and then loses her dad. So, right? And so,
Yes.
but are the tools really there to do that? And just think about, I guess, our cognitive and practice distance between like, oh wow, we need students that have some level of self-awareness and reflectiveness and the ability to do some, emotional regulation. And that's where we are now versus you had to be a white land the son of a white land owning man, right? And so how do we get there? That's a whole other question. But so Melinda, one of the questions that I have for you, and I know, CSU, at least in our community, has been long known for holistic admissions and all of these things. And in our surveys, every school says, yeah, we're doing holistic admissions after like this point. We're doing it at the very end. And I'm like, so, what do you think about some of the evaluation systems that, CSU and maybe other colleagues might be using? Do they really measure what we're looking for, number one? And two, do they reward or characterize as merit things that really are potentially more reflective of socioeconomic status, access, exposure, you name it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely very difficult if we look at our evaluation systems and trying to distinguish whether an individual has truly learned as they've moved through
Yeah.
their professional or their academic journey, or whether they're just really good at taking exams and demonstrating academic success in that more conventional sense.
Mhm.
I think as you mentioned, and we've talked about, our lack of a hard GPA cutoff certainly allows us to explore some of these areas. And, Shannon Henshaw, our Director of Admissions, has done a really beautiful job of taking our competencies and integrating those into the, really handbook that all admissions committee members receive and saying, okay, how might we look for this particular competency in, not only the academic record, but also experience, employment, letters of recommendation. How can we really explore the entire portfolio looking for how this individual may possess or not the competencies that we're seeking. So we really try to look at the approach that way and try to look for the individuals who, regardless of their grades recorded on their transcript, maybe may or may not be very good at actually taking information that they've accumulated over the years, integrating it, applying it, whether it's in the employment setting, whether it's in the academic setting, and really engaging in some effective problem solving, which again is exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, these things really, you know, I think that a lot of conversations about merit get distilled down such that we try to uncomplicate something that I think is really complicated, right? And this is all assuming that everyone in the pool that is being evaluated is able-bodied, neurotypical, like, that they fall within this curve of normal when normal is very messy. Like, because it's its own curve, right? And certainly, within my team here at AAVMC, we spend a lot of time talking about disability and all those things, and kind of like, how do we feel in certain systems being evaluated that don't take into consideration some of these needs, right? Or the way in which I, like, for myself, I always am very open about my own kind of neurospiciness, ADHD, dyslexia, late diagnoses on both. So, like, I have no idea what I would have done in K-12. I didn't get the first diagnosis until I was in undergrad. And so, like, sure, I got admitted and I did all the things and stuff, but also I do often wonder, like, hey, my SAT score wasn't
Mhm.
that is worthy.
Yeah, I mean, like many programs, we have bias training, but I think that's a, relatively low bar, honestly. And so as a human being, each person will bring diversity into the admissions discussions, and we celebrate that in a way because I think the diversity in the perspectives of the admissions committee can help promote diversity in our student body. So we celebrate that in some way. But in our case, we have a couple of layers where, a pair of admission committee folks will come up with a ranking and then they'll come together and talk with the larger committee. And so I think that dialogue as well is really effective in challenging individuals who may be perhaps a bit off track in some of the assumptions that they've made.
Great, thank you. Um, and so, that kind of builds on this next question, Amy. How do you, when you're working with a lot of committees, a bigger population than vet med, how do you get people talking about the difference between, say, aptitude and exposure, right?
Yeah, it's a really, really great question. And I think it can be a really difficult one. So I really appreciate what you said, Melinda, in terms of having pairs of reviewers and then having them come together and have that dialogue. Because I think and what you had said about also making sure you have like a broad range of diversity on your admissions committee, because I think those things matter, right? Having folks who bring their different perspectives, bring those different experiences, can help shed light sometimes on those. Well, is this an exposure issue, or is this, a lack of aptitude or aptitude that hasn't been demonstrated yet, or even had an opportunity to be demonstrated yet? And I think part of it is also really training committee members and any reviewers to be able to really read for the applicant's context. So, what did that person have and did not have access to throughout kind of their development? And I want to be really clear. I am not talking in any way about perpetuating an expectation that applicants submit trauma narratives as their
Oh, yeah.
personal essays. And so this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think equally as important as training your admissions committee members and your reviewers is also making sure that we get this information out to applicants. How do you tell your story? How do you tell your story as one of learning and development, and how that connects to your desire to become a healthcare professional, whether it connects to your desire to become a veterinarian or a physician or a PA or a nurse? Is, we know admissions can really seem like a black box sometimes. It can feel like a black box. And I think part of the job is to demystify that for applicants, not in a way that supposes there's a formula, because there's not. We know that, right? That's
Right.
what we've been talking about. There's not a formula. You can't do five things and then you're automatically going to get in. But when it comes to things like exposure or aptitude, I think it's reading for things like, well, does this person talk about being a primary caretaker of a sibling or another relative while they were growing up? And what different type of exposure or growth or development might that have led to in that individual? Did they attend a school that had AP courses? Did they not have AP courses? What was that transition to college like, right? Was it a, kind of coming in with all of this advanced coursework? Or was it coming in and having to figure out how to navigate an entirely new system because you're a first generation college student and nobody in your family can help you do that? Well, guess what? If you're having to navigate a new system entirely on your own and you're figuring that out, that tells me really meaningful things about, say, your problem solving,
Mm.
and say your ability to ask for help, your resilience, your adaptability. But I do think that context piece is incredibly important. Being able to read for what matters and kind of being able to kind of translate's not necessarily the right word, but to be able to read for what matters. And a lot of that comes with a lot of training and retraining and checking. Are your reviewers aligned in how they're reviewing? Do you have shared definitions of your criteria?
Mm.
Do you have, say, clear rubrics that are connected to those uh, clearly defined criteria so that everybody is operating from some of that same understanding of not only what to look for, but how to look for it?
Yeah. Yeah. And that, gets to this idea, the contextualizing achievement, right? And we had a little pre-talk about this as well. And, you know, is it because merit often is thought about as this kind of static thing, this idea of saying, well, maybe there's some trade-offs, maybe there's something, you know, how many different map, I was about to say map quests and then age myself because I'm from the 1900s, but like how many different routes can I get to from point A to point B, right? And so but if I only take this route, this is the route that counts. And so, Melinda, how, have you talked to your committees over the years, or even just in thinking in your engagements with colleagues, does this contextualizing achievement, the way that Amy talks about, in terms of aptitude, is it a strengthening thing as we think about, pushing it through the lens of merit, or does it undermine because it's less quantifiable?
Yeah, that's such a good question. For us, and I'll
Yeah.
say something that probably Shannon will be upset with me for saying, but we actually don't have rubrics because we find them, as you said, this is so messy and so multifactorial that we've really struggled to make a rubric fit. And we don't even give our admissions committee reviewers the cumulative GPA. We just
Mm.
just, hey, let's look at this really more broadly. I think to your point, Lisa, it does make it more complex. Of course, the attorneys always worry that it makes it less defensible,
Right.
but I think if we're going to really walk the talk, then that's what's required is to get messy. And we've long acknowledged, that a reviewing pair, one reviewing pair, let's say reviewing pair A, and reviewing pair B will very likely view the same applicant differently.
Yeah.
And an applicant may get an offer for admission if they're reviewed by one team versus another.
Mm.
And that's messy. And that's sometimes hard to explain to disappointed applicants. And yet there's just no way to put all this into a nice objective system for evaluation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, you mentioned the your general counsel not being too comfortable with any of this. Like, and I think that I think speaks to our desire to make this a much neater kind of defined thing, right? Because then it's like, oh, well, you didn't have this score and that's why you didn't get in. That, like, we change all the numbers and we have a whole equation and here's a whole thing and everything gets to a number and we put it in the computer and it spits it out and either you get in or you don't. But that's not really how it works at a lot of schools. There are some schools that it works fine and some schools where it doesn't. And then there's some schools that abroad that are like, you know what, we decide, like, hey, everybody that can do the work tends to have a minimum GPA of this. They have a few of these. This is the pool. Let's throw them on the floor and pick up 100 people. Like, very random, right? And they do okay.
What was Gladwell's whole proposal, right? Yeah.
Right? They do fine, right? And so, there's lots of different ways of getting at this, but it's that fear of of defensiveness, right? It's the fear that we're going to need to defend our way of thinking about this construct, that, is are constructs real? They are as real as we make them. Yeah, Amy.
Yeah, can I just add? And I really appreciate this because I will say that my thinking has changed a lot on this over the years and kind of continues to change because it is messy. It's inherently messy. One of the legal consultants we used to work with, or we've worked with, has always said, like, there is always going to be a subjective element to any good selection process, especially when you are talking about a selection process into professions or the schools to train people for professions where whether they are, whether they're going to be working with animals or just on humans, there are always humans who are part of that equation. And often humans at a time when they are most vulnerable. And that includes, right, when their pets or their animals are sick or injured. And so there's always going to be a subjective element because empathy is just, I know there are different empathy assessments and whatever, but you're not going to give like one of those empathy assessments at admissions and say, well, you have to score a particular way in order to be qualified for our school, whatever it is. I think sometimes where I'll really advocate for things like shared definitions that aren't so narrow that there's only one way to meet them, actually, that they tend to be broader. Because before people were operating on definitions that might have been extraordinarily narrow, but that was never out in the open, right? Where healthcare experience might have been shadowing. Okay, well, there are a lot of different ways to get healthcare experience, right?
Yeah.
But then it becomes something that you can educate your faculty and your leadership about. You can educate your prospective applicants. You can educate your surrounding communities about. So it's not thinking about something that's so narrow and so objective, and I'm intentionally putting quotes around that idea of objective, that it just all wraps up to one neat single score, but that there is enough clarity and enough of a shared understanding that you can communicate that out to all of the various parties who have some investment in your institution and the way you're admitting and selecting people.
Yeah. You said something, and I'm trying to remember, and I tried to jot it down, but this idea that, oh, well, we would not do empathy testing. And yet, during the heyday of the resilience conversation, like, I've been in rooms that's like, we should screen for resilience in admissions. And I'm like, no, we should not. Okay, maybe emotional regulation, but not like not.
What does that even mean?
What does that mean, right?
Yeah.
But like, we still have people that are like, oh, well, we didn't get exactly what we want because the students are complaining. And I'm like, that is part of just the nature of working with students. Number one. Number two, like, again, there's this desire, and having worked almost all of my career in health professions, like, the health professions loves a number, and tying that meaning to a number I come up on the social sciences side, and like numbers, yeah, we have those. We also have lots of words over there in that side of the house. And I mean, to the point where I'm working on a project and a qualitative project, and I've had people go, okay, but where are the statistics going to come from? And I'm like, we're not going to have statistics. Like, we're not going to have them, right? But part of that is this desire to nail it down, right? Like, okay, so anything above this number, da da, and anything below that number, da da, right? And so again, we're kind of still, it's this discomfort with a level of uncertainty in terms of what we think is a student earning their way in, right? Because also we want to predict that they're going to do okay. Like we want them to succeed.
Yes.
Otherwise, we all look bad.
Mhm.
Right? And so this it's this tension of the unknown around merit, and not being able to affix a very concrete, often numerical value with stuff, right? And if we don't have that, then we get this like, well, did you really earn it? And how do we know that you are better than so and so who was also a candidate? Like, and this is when, institutions end up in court and nobody wants it. And so, so I want to pivot as we start to wrap up, and I kind of do want to ask a bit. And again, this gets to that contextualizing piece, and so I'm kind of curious about both of your thoughts on certain forms of polish or professionalism, right? And so we all know that there's different dialects, there's different accents, there's different physical presentations, and even in letters of recommendation, we have huge bodies of literature that tell us that when we look across gender, that different language is used. Like, more strong active words are used for male candidates versus female candidates, right? More positive language is often used for white students versus non, with the exception of like, no, this student of color or this marginalized student is literally the best thing you've ever seen in your entire life, because, and then potentially you get into trauma porn, right? Like, look at all the things that they've overcome. And so, how do you take all of this in, and does it have value? And what of it gets mistaken for, again, readiness or aptitude? Melinda.
Mm. Yeah, my answer is fairly brief. You
I'm sure
know,
Shannon and your attorneys will be happy.
well, yeah, no, because we used to conduct interviews, many interviews, and after a number of years, we learned that really our classes weren't changing that much. And
Mm,
the other thing we learned was that on occasion of a student that really didn't capture the competencies that we've now defined might have done very well in their interview, and we know that happens. And so we just, in our hands, the MMIs just weren't particularly helpful, and a lot for that reason. It didn't change our class much, and we acknowledge that an individual's performance during an interview it's just related to so many factors,
yeah.
anxiety levels, as you say, language, neurodiversity or lack thereof. And so, yeah, we haven't used that for those reasons. And I think you summarized it well.
Yeah, yeah. Amy, any thoughts on how you chat with your folks about this?
Yeah, so I mean, in some ways I come back to the same question that I said earlier, which is what do you expect your learners to come in with, and what are you resourced and committed to developing in them? Well, guess what? Some of that polish or we call professionalism, often in a really narrowly defined or coded way, that's teachable. So, what are you actually really looking for?
Looking for. Mm.
Right? Are you looking for the polish? Are you looking, and in an age of, kind of things like generative AI, what does that polish even mean if we're thinking about, or in an age even before that,
Yeah.
when more affluent students had access to coaches
Mhm.
who would help them through their application process with differing levels and definitions of help, then what does that polish even mean in the first place? So
Yeah.
fundamentally, what are you actually looking for in your applicants as they matriculate into your school? And what are you committed and resourced to developing in them? And are you really truly thinking about this as a developmental opportunity? Understanding that where your learners come in is, of course, not how they're going to leave your school. But Lisa, when you were talking about merit isn't static, I also kept thinking, well, our applicants aren't static and our learners aren't static.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like we think of admissions as predestination, as though life doesn't continue to happen after they matriculate into our schools, as though there's not an interaction between the individual and the environment and their cohorts of learners.
Yeah.
So it just for me comes back to what fundamentally are you looking for? Do you have a shared understanding of what it is you're looking for? And how do you actually really look for that,
Yeah.
not the different kind of shiny layers that might be on top of it?
Yeah. Yeah. That's such a great point. And it's funny though, because when you think about it from that applicant's perspective, some of our research shows that, they go from like, I hope I get in, I hope I get in, I hope I get in, until they have the offer letter. And then they're on, I don't know, a website like maybe Student Doctor Network. And now they're an expert. Like I got in. And this is what, right? Again, because we're still, there is, to your point, this idea that this assessment ends, right? Like, so then they're in, and yes, new assessments start, but they're supposed to be building, right? And building blocks, all of those kinds of things, versus this okay, well, you got in, good luck in. Good luck with that, right? Which again gets to that static piece, and none of this is, and just to be really vet med, like it's going to be the animal that just doesn't do anything that you expect it to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how then, I think that you've kind of given us an interesting framework to think about this, the way that maybe individual programs and institutions can define merit as, this idea of what is it that you want when you think of raw material that you're going to mold into a professional. Like, what is that raw material coming with? And there is that institutional piece where, can you actually teach all the things that they're supposed to know, right? And Melinda, I'm going to come to you in just a minute, but I'm always struck because I also oversee our internal research program, and so everybody that wants to survey the colleges at the administrative level has to come through me. So I see the number of curriculum surveys, like they're not getting enough of fill in the blank during the 4 year program. And I'm like, it's only 4 years. It's 4 years. Not every month in the 4 years. Also not 24 hours a day. So some of them is gonna get left off. So, what is it? And so, I guess, how are you evaluating whether or not CSU's definition is working? Certainly, attrition, performance, blah, 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 blah. But like, how do you know, especially at that on the big picture?
Yeah, such a great question. Right. We need to assess what we're doing and make changes as a result of the data that we produce. Of course, it depends on the admission goals of the program. So you have to make sure those are very clear and then evaluate against those. But as we've said, it can be really difficult to objectively measure even when they're with you for 4 years, whether you've accomplished the goals that you seek to accomplish. Um, we really look at intentionally collecting and using data. So I think a lot of us have started to build our ability to collect a lot of student data due to some nice software programs that we all have. And I
Hmm.
think that's really amplified our ability to use what we get and make change and inform change based on those data. I do want to mention one very specific example of
Yeah.
what's happened here. We just started to notice more students struggling academically, and some of those individuals were first gen, some of those came from marginalized communities, some did not. But we tried to, again, use our data, do a retrospective analysis, look at their admissions data, and what we consistently saw was a marginal academic history. So we've been talking a lot about holistic admissions, and yet I have to also put on my
Yeah.
other hat and be the person to say, hey, I also oversee scholastic standards, and it's very, very difficult. And so it was determined that our faculty needed to have a more prominent voice in the admissions process,
Yeah.
as those individuals that are best positioned to really determine an individual's preparedness for the rigors of our program. And so now we have a second tier of review. So I think it's just being nimble. If you do think you see something, try to collect the data on it and determine whether it's just a hunch or whether it's real, and then be willing to make some of the hard changes that need to be made as a result of that.
Yeah. Thanks for giving us that example, and kind of bringing it back to, no, there are some hard data that really do matter,
Hmm.
right? There's some hard
Yes.
data that really do matter.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that there are also some folks that you're gonna take a chance on
Hmm.
and evaluate,
Hmm.
right? Some will be
Yeah.
fine and some won't, and you'll get to the heart of that. So, my last question for both of you, and Amy, I'm going to start with you because I want to give Melinda as much time as to just ponder, even though she probably already has an answer. So, if you were not burdened by the institutional history, if you were just starting something brand new, and you could build your own kind of admissions evaluation of merit for applicants, what assumptions, not the details, but like what big assumptions about merit would you challenge? What might
Um,
say we need to pick this apart a little bit?
yeah, so I think it's a great question. I think it's a really hard question. So there are a few things that come to mind, and I'm sure more will come to mind when I'm asleep tonight that I really wish I said. One of them, and I think that this is often, whether it's intentional or not, a conflation that's made, is that kind of merit becomes personalized in the individual and not about that individual's actions and behaviors. So to really focus on that person's actions and behaviors, on their learning, their development, what they've done.
Mm.
We're beginning to see this, but I'm not sure it always fully sticks. So I'd want to continue to challenge the idea that grades and test scores are somehow inherently objective in a way that we know they just aren't. They're influenced by people's access and opportunity and all sorts of different factors. And this is this is one, and it's going to sound like I'm disagreeing with what you just said about academic preparedness, Melinda, which is not actually what I mean at all, because I think the academic readiness piece is absolutely essential. We just know it's not enough in and of it by itself, right? It's an incomplete definition of merit, but it's a necessary component
Sure.
of merit. Because if you can't get through school, you're not going to be able to help that school meet its mission, and you're not going to be able to help meet those workforce and community needs, right? But I would want to challenge the idea that being meritorious in an admissions or selection process means that you're not going to need support once you matriculate. And there's a difference between, right, coming in with a level of academic preparedness that just is not aligned with what the school is prepared to support or with what the curriculum needs. And then there's the reality that you're human and life continues to happen, and likely entering the type of intense training environments that are our veterinary medical schools, that are our human medical schools, is probably just going to be a different environment than you've been in before. And you're going to have to learn how to learn, often in very different ways than you've had to before. And guess what? Asking for help, asking for support is a really important professional skill.
Yeah.
So that's one I'd really like to challenge, is that being meritorious in admissions means you aren't going to need support. Just means that the support you need might be different, and it'll be different for any learner. And you can't always predict what that's going to look like during the admissions process.
Awesome. Thank you so much. As someone who had accommodations in undergrad, but was also on a full academic scholarship, yes, some of us need support.
Yeah, support. You need accommodations in order to have the same access to the learning opportunities that your peers, like who don't need accommodations, already just enter with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that could also be resources. It could be so many different things. So
100%.
yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. So Melinda, all right.
Yeah, and this again goes a little more moves a little away from admissions directly, but is related to the question. We've recently been evaluating a couple programs, and in talking about one program in particular, that is designed to serve students who have experienced hardships in their journey. In talking about the idea that certainly not all, but some of those individuals might struggle a bit more academically for very legitimate reasons, and that's why that program was designed, is to really bring in, coaches, folks that do different things in our profession to help folks see, what's out there for them, study skills, time management, those types of things. So it's absolutely what it's designed for. But, when we were talking about it, someone had said, well, remember C equals DVM. And I said, well, yes, that's true. But in our hands, the individuals who tend to earn more C's than anything else, are also the individuals that tend to remediate a lot more, struggle a bit more on clinics, may not pass NAVLE the first or second time. And notably, these individuals really have a tough time from a well-being perspective. They're always they're struggling to keep up, rather than really internalizing the information and having the opportunity to kind of sit back, digest it, think about, oh, how can I integrate and apply this to, authentic scenarios, they're just hanging on by their fingernails, and it's just heartbreaking to watch. And so, I think there's just this place that we have to really be strategic in defining where to draw the line regarding acceptable academic performance, and importantly, how to support all learners by engaging those best practices, summative exams, contextualizing information, revisiting material, application, and all those things that we can do to help people during their time with us. And so that's just something we've thought a lot about recently, and we've thought, how can we really support individuals from under-resourced communities, first-gen families, some of the populations we've talked about, those who have faced hardship? How can we support them in becoming well-equipped and competitive applicants. And so we're currently looking at considering more undergraduate outreach, engaging with those individuals with academic coaching, experiential opportunities, professional mentorship, so that then when they enter the program, we talked about that transition that can be so different for many different people. How can we smooth that transition and really allow them to start in a place where they feel more equipped?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah. I mean, I think that there are definitely assumptions that I think we all bring to the table when we talk about merit. And there's, lots of different ways of demonstrating that. And yet, these processes are constricted by time and volunteer time and money and resources and all the things, right? And so, you're trying to squeeze, really a lot of work into a very small period of time as well. And trying to, again, be flexible and contextual and all of the, and so a lot is being asked of the committees, even as we ask a lot of the applicants. So I think that a lot more grace on on both sides would be really, really helpful. So before, folks that maybe didn't get in this cycle to CSU and other institutions, before you call, like, you're welcome to call and to get that application review, but before you do, like really sit down and kind of think through and go through your own stuff and say, hey, how do I feel about these? Like, what context do I bring to the table that maybe isn't reflective? Right. And so part of that is also just helping applicants feel empowered as well. Right. And so we got a lot of new schools coming up in vet med. And I think that there is a lot of excitement at those schools because, again, you don't have that historical legacy that, well, this is how we've done it. And yes, we do change it and evolve it, but that's such an iterative process versus like, oh, I get to plant a flag. Let's see what happens. And so I'm really excited to see what happens with our new member institutions over the next few years. And, I do hope that folks recognize that merit, especially with the discourse that we've had in the last 18 months, is not as cut and dry, not as simple, and not as static as a lot of maybe the public discourse has suggested it is. Yeah, Amy.
Can I just put in a plug for
Yeah.
folks? This is one of my big questions, certainly to our medical schools, is what are you actually explicitly defining as merit? And what is just, hey, these are the criteria and this is what we value in applicants? Because I do think that there's a substantive difference. And it might not
Yes.
really feel like it because it might be, well, this is what we're looking for in our admissions process. So, of course, it's what we think merit is. But I think, especially given the environment that we're in now, that there is real power in actually naming what you value as merit and aligning that, say, if you have merit scholarships, what do you award merit scholarships for? And is that actually aligned with what we're naming as merit in the admissions process? Not just what
Yeah.
we value, not just what we think is important for students to enter with, but what do we actually define merit as being and including?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Actually, there's a new study out. I could have sworn I just saw it in the Inside Higher Ed again, and this is not new. We've been seeing this trend for decades where merit scholarships actually disproportionately go to affluent students. And, there's a clear line there. And if and in order to wrap this up, if you want me to tell you what the clear line is, feel free to drop me an email. I will be happy to tell you at lgreenhill@aavmc.org. So with that, I am so happy to have had this conversation with both of you. Thank you so much, Melinda. Thank you, Amy. Can't wait to do it again. Don't worry. I will find something else for us to talk about. Yeah, because like as I was telling my guest earlier that I love nothing more than talking about professionalism and all the really interesting ways in which we assess it, measure it, do all the things, and kind of what our competencies are associated with that, and which aren't explicitly, and yet we also are like, yeah, that's not professional. But that's like, is it not? Yeah. So anyway, lots of content about that certainly on previous podcasts, but again, thank you so much to both of you. I've really enjoyed our conversation. So this has been another episode of AAVMC's On Air podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app, and be sure to tell a colleague or friend. We will see you next time.